Thank you for joining this IACCM and Agiloft webinar entitled How to Calculate the Value of Automating Your Contract Lifecycle Management. We'll get started in just a minute. We have three panelists for today's discussion: Paul Branch from IACCM, Laura Maxwell from EY Law, and Hiro Notaney from Agiloft. The discussion will be followed by a Q&A session. Attendees will be on mute during the presentation part, but please submit your questions in the appropriate window in the GoToWebinar platform at any time during the presentation. The panelists will address them. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Alistair, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to those folks listening to this on replay. So my name's Paul Branch. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Technology Officer at the IACCM. And we have a really interesting presentation for you today. I mean, all the IACCM webinars are great, as you know, but this one's going to be spectacular. How to calculate the value of automating your contract lifecycle management. So these sessions are always great when we're joined by a practitioner. And Laura Maxwell, Associate Director at Ernst & Young Law, is absolutely one of those. So in a bit, we're going to hear from Laura and also from Hiro. Hiro Notaney is VP of Marketing at Agiloft. But before we get into that, calculating the value, what does that mean? At IACCM, we're focused on enabling organizations and professionals to achieve world-class standards in their trading relationships. And the thing that really unlocks that value is the contract. The contract is the glue. The contract is the gearbox that makes the interactions between these trading partners really hum. And the speed and efficiency of that gearbox is driven by a whole range of things, by the people that are operating the process, by the process itself, but also, and the third leg of that stool is the technology that is being used to automate that contract lifecycle management. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Before we get there though, Hiro, Agiloft has been on something of a tear recently, winning some industry accolades. So what's happening in your neck of the woods?
Thanks, Paul. Yes, it's been quite a ride this year. Gartner recognized us as a leader in the first Magic Quadrant for CLM. And then a few weeks later, Gartner's Critical Capabilities report came out, and we were the top-rated CLM vendor in all 4 use cases: procurement, sales, legal, and enterprise. Spend Matters has also rated us as the value leader for CLM in its 2020 Q1 report. Plus, we found out a couple of weeks ago that our engineering team won a Stevie for its AI engine. Of course, none of this would be possible without customers like Laura.
So thank you for the segue. What a great segue. So let me introduce you to Laura Maxwell. Laura is a member of the Ernst & Young Law team. And obviously, being from a legal team, we have to have a disclaimer. But as usual, let's not put it up long enough for folks to actually read it. Let's get on to the meat. So over to you, Laura.
Great, thank you, Paul. As Paul indicated, my name's Laura Maxwell. I work for EY and have been with the firm for over 20 years now. Wide variety of backgrounds with the firm. I started in the client service world in our tax practice, doing international tax work, then moved over into a project management role, and that was kind of where I got my introduction to Agiloft and to actually the whole CLM world of CLM applications, and oversaw an implementation of Agiloft for EY, which I will talk about shortly. If we kind of go to the next slide, just a little background on who EY is. If you're not familiar with us, we're what's known as a professional services organization, also known as part of the Big Four. We're not the Academy Awards people, we're the Golden Globes people. But we're a very large firm globally. We have about 260,000 employees. I represent and work for the US firm, and right there we have 40,000 employees. And we have decided, when we decided to kick off our implementation of a CLM application, it was for our tax practice, and which is about 10,000 US-based tax professionals, and we thought we were doing maybe 25,000 contracts per year for our tax practice. So that's kind of some background on EY and kind of the situation in which we were looking at to implement a CLM application. And I'm actually going to hand it over to Paul for the next slide.
Yes, thank you, Laura. That's a great introduction. And we're going to hear much more from Laura in just a sec around her practical experiences. And I'm sure that you, as you hear that, you're going to need to ask, that there'll be burning questions in your mind. Just a quick reminder to use the Q&A tab to raise questions as we go. But as you saw at the beginning, how to calculate the value of automating your contract lifecycle management. Let's look at the value that's unlocked through a CLM system. Based on IACCM research, we've seen that the business benefits of the value that's derived from deploying some automation really fit into two buckets. There's the first bucket, the direct benefits, if you like, which are really quite easy to manage, to measure. They're things like increasing the deal velocity or increasing efficiency through the application of principles and of standards. So these things you can, with a stopwatch, you can time how long it takes to do something manually. You can then repeat the process in a tool, and you can see incremental improvement as you move from one to the other. Now, those direct benefits, I call them cost to serve benefits. They're the costs of serving the process. Now, the other bucket, the other category of benefits are things that are more related to secondary and tertiary benefits that you see coming from the implementation. Things like reducing the risk profile, being more adept at applying controls or indeed mitigations to better manage your risk based on a consequence of more effective obligations tracking, jeopardy management, issues mitigation and control. A reduction perhaps in disputes. So as a consequence of your improved relationships that you have with your clients, then you have an improved reduction in dispute, improved communication, and much better relationship with your stakeholders. Stakeholders, an interesting area. Let's take a look at those, because within a CLM system, certainly to unlock some of this value, you need to understand who your stakeholders are. So on the next slide, we'll see that our stakeholders can derive very different value from the successful implementation of a CLM tool. Your general counsel is concerned first and foremost about risk. We just talked about that, but also regulatory compliance and identifying who is responsible when things don't go exactly as planned. So secondary consideration may be ensuring as few derogations against corporate trading policy happen as possible. Now, your chief revenue officer cares about getting from agreement to signature as quickly as possible. The chief purchasing officer wants to make sure vendors are delivering the goods and services at the negotiated price, quality, and timescales. So different organizations will focus on different benefits based on their organizational needs. Value is in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. So, Laura, what were the key drivers in your organization, and did you realize the benefits that you were expecting?
Great, thanks, Paul. So I know I didn't kind of touch on this in my previous slide, but just kind of going back to when I was first brought onto the project, and we did have some key considerations that we were looking at. We wanted a central repository for all of our contracts. Like I said, we thought we did about 25,000 contracts a year just for the US tax practice, but we really had no idea because we didn't have a centralized repository. We had no way of knowing anything really about those contracts. They were sitting in a document repository like a SharePoint library, but they were also sitting on people's hard drives. We also knew that people were not probably using the right templates. So we really needed to get insight into our contracting process. So that was really something that we were looking for. And the reason and how we kind of got to Agiloft is that, well, somebody had already done all the work for us in tax, for tax. Basically, our business risk group had already gone through all the due diligence of looking at various CLM applications, and they had selected Agiloft for their CLM implementation. And we looked over all the hard work that they did and said, great, you've done everything for us. We're going to pick Agiloft as well, and we're going to leapfrog over you, start our project, and go live before you guys do, because we're tax and that's what we do. And part of the reason for that is that, as I mentioned, we did need the single source of truth. We were definitely looking for risk mitigation. We really wanted to ensure that people were only using the latest and greatest version of a template that had the most up-to-date language in it. A lot of the drive for us implementing this is because one of our key stakeholders was our tax quality leadership, and it's really critical that we have the proper language in our templates. We are a public accounting firm, and even though that's not the portion that tax is involved with, we still, because we audit, we provide audit services, we have very specific language that has to be included in our contracts with our clients. And we have to make sure that that we're actually including that language. And like I said, that someone's not just taking an old Word document that's been sitting on their hard drive for 5 years and using that to generate their SOW. The other kind of, when we were really looking at everything, you'll see our use case. We really wanted this user-friendly technology that was going to enable our end-to-end process. It needed to be something that we were going to be able to configure and adapt, because while we had a process in place, we weren't 100% certain that it was the right process, and we knew we were going to need something that was relatively agile, that would allow us to make changes. We also needed something that would allow us to quickly make changes to our contract templates. We do have, new regulatory language that comes in, or maybe a new service offering, so it requires a new template. So, we really needed to make sure that we had something that we could, that we ourselves could administer. Because the other kind of piece of our puzzle is that at the time, 2017, when we were considering this, the whole idea of software as a service, cloud hosted, any of that, that was just not part of our language at the time at EY, really, for an application like this. We needed an on-prem solution, and Agiloft was able to provide that. And we have a relatively complex IT environment, and I knew that was potentially going to impact our schedule, but I didn't realize just how much it was going to impact our schedule. So,
like every other corporation with a complex
right, yes, we're probably not alone there. Yes, we're probably not alone there. But the fact that they had the on-prem solution for us was also, another benefit. For sure. Because, like I said, at the time, now if I was doing this now, believe it or not, 3 years later, it is a different world, even at EY. But this was the world I was living in at the time. And so when I came onto the project and understanding all these factors, I was also handed a timeline and said, this has to be implemented by September. And it was had to be implemented by September 2018, actually, because we signed our deal with Agiloft in June of 2018 and started our design and implementation right away with a targeted go live of September. So like 3 months basically to do everything. And needless to say, that was not the most realistic timeline, and we were not able to meet the timeline, and for a wide variety of reasons, none of which that was not really anybody's fault. Just again, a lot of it was IT challenges and just kind of working out the kinks of getting it installed in our environment.
So the questions are piling in. So let me interrupt you for just 1 second.
Sure.
So a great question from Chuck about how we manage stakeholders. Clearly, you've got this swirl of different stakeholders. Any advice that you could give to our audience today about how to manage the different needs of the stakeholders?
Yeah, so that's like a fantastic question, because I think that that was one of the things that I had to struggle with, because my main stakeholder was my tax quality group, but at the same time, I also, I had general counsel, and then I had our actual, like our people, our tax business, and there's, tax quality and wanting to make sure that they got everything that they wanted in the application and meeting their demands and their timeline was challenging. But how I managed them was really, a lot of that was just really communication and education. And I had some difficult conversations that I would have to have with them. A lot of it at that particular time was relating to why we were having our delays. And so a lot of it was just a lot of communication, but also helping them I was trying to get them to understand that the approach that we need to take with implementing this is that we really need to make sure that we capture the voice of the end user, what we would call the voice of the customer. And I'll kind of go into that a little bit more, because what you're going to see, and this is like a kind of a good segue here, you're going to see that if we look at the next slide, we did go live. This is good. So this is version 1, so as I call it. So we had the challenges that I talked about. We had this timeline. We thought that our contracting season was September to November. Again, I didn't know if that was accurate because I had no way to really get the data because I didn't have a contracting system in place. We had this really conservative and very complex IT environment. And while I kept trying to get the voice of the customer, I was given some good resources, but we will see that I didn't quite capture that, and I'll talk more about that. So we were supposed to go live in September. We went live in January 2018. So really missed the mark there. So a lot of concern that I missed the contracting season. Now, granted, I said we do about 25,000 contracts a year. They're not spread equally over the year. It's not like it's 2,000 each month. But I know that we probably do several hundred at least each month, and then we have a big uptick when we're kind of doing our annuity work and getting those contracts out. But so we go live in January 2018, and if we go to the next slide, you'll see kind of our numbers. So I'm thinking we're probably going to get 500 to 700 contracts at least a month. You can see I didn't really do very well. I do go up at least each month, but in the course of 6 months, when I should have at least seen maybe not half of those 25,000, but I should have at least seen several thousand, I would have thought, I saw 388. And you can imagine my stakeholders were basically not particularly happy because we were not getting, people were not using the application. We were getting a lot of feedback from our end users, from the people that had been trained in this application. A lot of it was too complicated, it was too rigid, they needed more flexibility. So they would basically, they might use it to get the template, but then after that, they just were walking away. They just couldn't figure it out, there wasn't enough training. Although we had quite a bit of training before we went live, probably big mistake we made there. Training people 6 weeks before you go live is not ideal because they forget everything you taught them. So, we just not really successful. So I had a bit of a problem that I really had to solve here. I was really fortunate that I had not lost the confidence of my stakeholders, because I was presenting to them and being honest with them about what the challenges were, where we had our missteps, and I came up with a solution. I was fortunate enough to get a resource who was just an immense help to me. I brought in a individual who was a Lean Six Sigma black belt to help us basically re-engineer this, look at our process, look at what we deployed, and figure out how we miss that voice of the customer and what we can do, and in as limited a time frame as possible. And remember, I have Agiloft, so I know I have an agile solution. I have something I can go and change, unwind some of what I've done, make some changes. So we basically had some brainstorming sessions, got some surveys, some user experience feedback, and we put our heads together and we did we redesigned kind of the user interface, the user experience, what the process flow, workflows were going to be, and we presented it to our leadership, to our key stakeholders, and said, this is what we want to do. We want to basically shut down the application in the middle of June and do a redesign, and we will go live on September 5th, and we will meet our timeline. And so we had another very aggressive timeline, but I didn't have all the IT considerations to deal with, so I knew that that wasn't going to be an issue because this was all just configuration work. I also met with Agiloft and presented kind of what we wanted to do, and fortunately I had a little bit of budget left. So I worked with Agiloft. They kind of came up with a proof of concept based on our redesign. And because we were an on-prem solution, it wasn't something that I could have Agiloft build and then transfer over to us. This was something that they were going to have to help us. And basically, we just had a lot of sessions that summer of me working with an Agiloft implementer, walking me through all the changes that we needed to make. I had also brought on another individual who was helping out, so we were just basically reconfiguring the system. And I am very happy to say that after all of our configuration work, we didn't have time for training. Again, there was no budget left for training. So I knew we were going to go live without any training. So we were just going to have on-demand training. And I was okay with that because thinking back to kind of what the experience was before and what I'd heard from the voice of my customer was being trained, several weeks before we went live. They forgot everything. It wasn't helpful. And they just needed to know, they needed to access some sort of content that could help them when we went live to get through the application. So, so if we go to the next slide. So we did this is version 2. So this is everything that I just talked about. So we redesigned the end user interface. We gave teams a little bit more control. We streamlined the approval process. We had a very rigid workflow that we had put in place, an approval process, kind of very much one size fits all. And it was also a little complicated the way we had designed it, the way people had to even create and launch the approvals and assign approvers. We really just streamlined all of that. When we originally went live, we only had 2 of our contract templates available for people. With this go live, we had 24 templates that were now available for people, so that we made sure that we were really giving people a lot of options. And so when we went live in September with kind of our breath held on this and how is this going to work out? We knew maybe contracting season was going to start in September, although I was a little unsure of that. A lot of that was based on anecdotal evidence, and that was kind of one of the things that kind of tripped us up in our first implementation, is that we designed a lot of it based on people's anecdotes, based on the worst contracting situation they ever had, instead of just their day-to-day contracting situation. So we went live with version 2, and if we go to the next slide, if you remember when we previously went live in the course of 6 months, we had about 388 contracts go through the application. And with our version 2, we managed to get our numbers to increase quite a bit. So basically what we're seeing here is that our contracting season is actually November through January, not starting in September. And we were able, I mean, user adoption with pretty much no training, we were able to get people to, we opened up the application so anybody could use it, and basically it provided them with something that, when I look at the feedback that we received on version 2, it was, I would say, 98% positive. Every once in a while, of course, we would get people who couldn't figure out how to do something, or it just didn't work for their particular situation, but we had workarounds. We knew, you know, those were the outliers. And that's kind of one of the things that I learned a lot from this project, was that when you get a bunch of people together and they tell you what they want, they tend to give you a lot of anecdotal evidence. They tend to remember the worst case scenario, or, you know, even for myself, when I think back on my career with EY, it's the craziest clients with the most ridiculous tax situations that I remember. But that was not my day to day. My day to day was, you know, pretty much that's the 80%, the 90% of my work. And that's what I really need to make sure that I focus on when I'm looking to design, you know, do a CLM implementation, is focus on what that day to day is. Yes, think about your outliers. And, you know, you probably, if you have a CLM application that allows you to, you know, is relatively agile, do some configuration in it, so that can deal with those, or think about your process, because you might have those outliers, and you might just have to look at what your process is and how you deal with those, and it might not necessarily be the technology that needs to be configured to the nth degree to deal with them.
So Laura, we
Mhm.
have more questions than I know what to deal with.
Sure. Okay.
But let's just get a few out there. So you talked earlier about getting customer feedback. So Nicole's asked, do you have any customer feedback survey templates that you use?
So what we did is we built a survey in SharePoint. That's kind of what was available for us at the time, and we did I think our initial survey was, we did 2 different surveys. We did one that was just a 1-question survey of kind of that was just very much like a text response of, you know, what do you really want from a CLM application? What do you want it to do that it isn't doing? This is kind of what we did with after we had put version 1 out there. And then we had I want to say it was either a 5 or 8 question survey that we sent out that was all pretty much like yes, no, or choice responses, with some very directed questions on where we knew our pain points were, which were really around our approval workflows. And so we just made sure that we were, I mean, I wasn't asking leading questions, but we were very careful in the way in which we crafted our questions, to ensure that we were getting honest and useful feedback from our end users, and not trying to lead them. I didn't want to lead them to a particular answer. I just wanted to know, when they thought about their day-to-day work, you know, what do you know, what's your most common approval situation that you see? Does it involve our tax quality team? Does it involve our general counsel? You know, just really trying to really understand, you know, the 80-90% of the situations, and not the outliers.
And a lot of questions coming in about the complexity. So Jose and Harvey also, was there a lot of customization that you had to use for your implementation?
We were probably like in the, you know, in the medium level of complexity. It's definitely not the most complex CLM implementation, but we did have some definite customization that was like specific to our particular situation. We have, so it was a lot of our customization revolved around the redlining. of the documents, and that changes to specific language in those documents would trigger additional approvals. That's something that's probably where a lot of our, quote unquote, customization was in. And of course, and the way we chose to use our clause library was probably a little bit different than you would see kind of in the legal world or the law world.
Mm-hmm.
But and yeah, so that, like I said, for us, the customization was primarily around the workflows, and then later on, as the application has kind of, with more use and adoption, then what we've really focused on, I wouldn't call this customization, but we've really focused on what's the data that we can get out of the application. What are the metrics? What's the information about the life cycle of an SOW or a contract at the US tax?
We've got stacks more questions, but I think in the interest of time, we're going to need, let's take a look at your lessons learned, and then we will transition into the value of the CLM tool set.
Sure. So this is kind of thinking kind of our current state. We all got thrown into this world of COVID-19, and that has actually had an impact and has also been a way for us to kind of get some insights into our contracting process. Obviously, we've seen an uptick in the usage of DocuSign. That's just kind of in general. We're all working from home. We're not going and meeting clients in the same way. So, obviously DocuSign has become very critical for us. And I would say that, amendments, that's probably an area where we didn't put a lot of focus when we were originally implementing Agiloft. Amendments, it was just like, oh yeah, we have to amend contracts, and we're not really going to track much around them other than if it extends the date of a contract. But of course, in this COVID-19 world, you probably really want to get some information. Why are your clients amending their contracts? Is it to extend payment terms? Is it looking for a reduction in fees? Or is it perhaps something else? Also, obviously, there's analysis you could do if you had to, had certain clauses in maybe your MSA or your main agreements that clients might want to trigger because of the COVID-19 situation. So amendments is something that definitely in this world that we're in, we're seeing a bigger uptick there, and now have the ability to kind of get more information about that. And then also I would say, Agiloft is also having a CLM application in place has also made us realize just we do have kind of some outlier groups in tax that are not using our CLM application. And what we've kind of been able to do is kind of see that by having the CLM in place, this time to signature, that is so much quicker with the application in place and with the use of DocuSign. Those two kind of go hand in hand to really reduce the contracting time, because one of the things we did see is that the people who don't use DocuSign, it takes much longer. It can take 5 days to get a contract signed, whereas generally when you send it out with DocuSign or Adobe Sign, whichever you were using, you see that just go from like 5 days to less than 24 hours. People are just much quicker to sign when you're using e-signature. So those are kind of the things that we've taken away. I don't know if there are any more questions, Paul, or
I think we'll keep plugging, and
okay.
From what you've shared, obviously you're getting a lot of value from the CLM that you set out to get, and it's interesting to me that you mention analytics like time to signature and the payment terms. IACCM's done quite a bit of research around obviously the whole contracting process and how value is derived, and I touched on some of this a little earlier. You'd be surprised, I think, at how much time even simple contracts require in terms of processing. So we did one study that put the average cost of processing even a routine contract at just under $7,000. And that was just to get it through to execution, not the in-life management of the contract. So what we can do is we can look at these cost to serve and these cost of quality benefits. Cost to serve, straightforward. You can look at the volume of units of work being performed, steps in the units of work. So it's A times B times C times D, straightforward calculation. So if you can reduce the time for that unit of work, or indeed replace the manual activity with an automated workflow within a CLM tool, then you can not only reduce cost to serve by taking cost out of the process, but you can also improve the quality of delivery, take cost out of the second component of that, these cost of quality elements. So it's the combination of those two things that then leads to a cost to manage outcome. So Hiro, I know Agiloft has done quite a bit of work quantifying the value of CLM. So tell us, what have you found?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. We used industry benchmarks to build an ROI calculator that quantifies the value organizations can expect to receive from CLM. So the research identified 5 areas of value. The first is operational efficiencies. This is mostly about legal man hours, so the time spent reviewing contracts, redlining, approving, and so on. So Goldman Sachs estimates automation of this process saves about 20% of budget. And our customer findings were consistent with that. Our customers found about 20% savings on legal man hours, etc. The second source of savings is around the purchasing process, which is the efficiencies from streamlining vendor operations, everything from onboarding the vendors to managing the obligations in those contracts. Hackett Group study estimates that companies should save about 12% from purchasing operations. Our customers were able to identify, on average, about 8% savings. Still not a bad amount. So a good example of this is a company called Inman Technologies, which manages airports. They buy a lot of products and services that were subject to regular price changes, things like fuel, de-icing fluid, etc. Before automating their system, they were using Excel sheets and binders to keep track of the contract expirations. But for them, missing a contract expiration could mean a huge price increase or a missed opportunity to renegotiate terms, which was exactly what was happening before they installed Agiloft. Now, Paul Gamble, the manager over there, gets an automatic alert before any contract expiration or any price increase. And the result has been it saved them thousands of dollars. And more importantly, it's given him and the team over there peace of mind. So the third area of value is sales operations. This is about reducing the red tape salespeople have to go through before completing an agreement. So for them, the killer app is one-click contract creation and approval. So I know earlier you talked about IACCM studies, and one of those studies estimates that companies are leaving up to 9% of revenue on the table. Now, in our customer survey, our customers were able to positively identify about 3% of revenue. So for a $100 million company, $3 million a year is still a significant sum. One of our customers was telling us that before the automating process, it took more than a month to get a standard sales contract signed after all the terms had been agreed to. So needless to say, a lot can happen in a month. A good example would be a global pandemic. One customer example that I found interesting was a company called Immersion Corporation, which is a virtual reality company that uses haptic technology. That's a fancy word for touch. And their business model is to bring virtual worlds to life. So in contrast to their cutting edge products, they were managing thousands of contracts in SharePoint, which was a problem because they had a fairly complicated sales workflow. I'm not going to get totally into it, but it involved simultaneously creating a purchase request and a deal sheet in Salesforce. They had different approval workflows for different types of customers, a different workflow for film companies versus video game companies, for example. So there was a lot of confusion and delays, and that all disappeared once they put in a CLM system. The fourth and fifth values associated with automating CLM are security and regulatory compliance. We didn't find a lot of industry benchmarks quantifying the value of security and compliance. When we asked our customers, a message that came through loud and clear was that they valued security and compliance of automating much higher than the efficiency benefits we just went through. In many cases, it was the driver for considering CLM software. So, put to the spot, they on average, they valued the risk reduction associated with enhanced security at an average of 10% of revenue, and regulatory compliance was valued at another 10%. Those numbers are a little bit tricky because valuing security and compliance requires an estimate. And so some people took an insurance approach, i.e. how much would it cost me to buy liability insurance, while others took a more absolute approach where they saw security and compliance as an existential issue. So there's still some work to be done on quantifying the value of security and compliance. But speaking of security, here's some food for thought. I was talking to an IDC analyst for legal ops, and he told me one of the primary issues he's seeing from lawyers that result from the COVID crisis is that they're having difficulty accessing contracts because they're stored in people's computer desktops at work or in emails or spreadsheets, etc. So there's an eye-opener for you.
Indeed, and that really tees into the IACCM research also that really supports that same position, in that 64% of our members that responded to a recent survey, 64% acknowledged that they had made no material investment in automation capability in the contract space, so that they were still with contracts in filing cabinets or in best case in a repository somewhere that was not electronically searchable. So that creates for us a huge opportunity. So if you look here, the quotes, bringing it up to date with quotes from Satya and also the corporate council, already an unmitigated disaster and about to get worse. We have a lot to do as a discipline in the effective application of technology. The fact that a large proportion of those that are deployed do not deliver the business benefits, that's something that we need to address. And the tools and techniques that Laura has shared with you in terms of, let's say, the keys: stakeholder management, engagement, planning, being agile to take feedback from your community, and that huge focus on stakeholder management. These are the hallmarks of a successful delivery. And why now? That last comment before we move on. 81% of the guys who responded to our research back in April either have or will now develop plans to implement, replace, or add to their contract automation capability. So many folks don't have it today, but a large proportion of our membership are moving forward, recognizing the benefits of enhanced automation. So I think we've made a decent case for automating contract management. If you'd like to take this next step, what do you need to know about choosing and implementing a system? So Laura, what advice would you offer?
So kind of, thanks, Paul, what I mentioned before, make sure when you're getting that voice of your customer that you're actually getting the right voice of your customer, and that you, when you're gathering your information and looking at what your process is, make sure that people are focused on how is this going to help them in their day-to-day job, not the outliers. You need to gather that information about the outliers because you do need to think about what's going to be the best approach. But really, it's that 80-90% of what you do day in and day out. The other thing, and this is where choosing an agile application is incredibly helpful, is that I would say start small or smallish. Take a truly agile approach. Don't take a waterfall approach with this. Look and see what's your minimum viable product. What's the thing that you could go live with? Where's the place where this could really help? Maybe it's just managing the templates. Maybe it's just document creation. And then, look and see, and then you can take the time to figure out what your workflows should be and add those in. Or maybe it's that you start with one particular group. Maybe you've got, a business unit that they have a pretty good process in place. They don't have a lot of outliers. Maybe they act as your model for, what your contracting process can and should be. And you implement it with them first, and then, build it out as you bring in other groups. So I think it's just really critical that you just take a really very thoughtful approach and give yourself the time to do this. I understand, I get timelines and having to work to them, but I also think at the end of the day, we wasted 6 months of time because we didn't implement the right configuration of Agiloft for our people. And, maybe if we could have just taken a little bit more time, gotten better feedback initially and really thought it through and gone live with, just kind of like a minimum viable product at first and then built it out, that we wouldn't have had to do a redesign.
So in hindsight, with your minimum viable product, would you do a big bang or would you do department by department, asks Geronimo?
Yeah, so I probably would have taken the approach of, I would have done the big bang to make it available to everyone for just initially for, let's just get it so that everybody's using the right template. Because remember, quality was really driving this. And so it was, I've got to make sure that I've got all the templates there for my people so that they can generate their contracts, and so that I'm at least meeting that first key driver that we had of making sure that from a quality standpoint. So that's probably what I would have done in our particular situation. But like I said, in other situations, you could probably develop something that's more end-to-end on your process, but just implement it for one particular business unit or one particular group or department, and then build it out from there.
Great, thank you, Laura. So Hiro, from the vendor side, any pitfalls to avoid?
Yes, so I encourage you to start with a few questions of your own. So the first is, be clear about the benefit you expect. What is your primary motivation for buying a system? Is it to save money from vendors, minimize legal or regulatory exposure? Is it to protect your revenue base? Or is it a full enterprise system that integrates with your ERP and CRM to give you all the data you need in a single pane of glass? Your immediate need will, to a large extent, determine what type of system you choose. From a scalability perspective, there's nothing wrong with starting small, as Laura just said, and working out the kinks before you make a big investment. If you do start small or with a department-specific system, make sure the system you choose is going to scale to other departments and to the organization as a whole. You don't want to start with a system, start getting the benefits, and then have to rip out and replace it just when you're getting the benefits. Usability and customizability. This is, again, what Laura talked about quite a bit. Just as important as the features will be how usable the system is. So like any software, user adoption will play a big role in how successful your deployment is. If people don't use it, it doesn't matter how great the system is. And one thing you should do is consider customizability as a component of usability. People don't want to change their established work processes to accommodate new software. So the more easily the software can be adapted to the way your teams work, the better. And one of the advantages of Agiloft is that it's a no-code software, so it's easily reconfigured. And Laura talked a little bit about how they did reconfigure it to make sure that it worked for their system. From an implementation perspective, my CEO likes to quote the Standish Group Chaos Report that only 29% of enterprise software projects are considered a success. So the point there is that implementation is just as important as the software itself. So make sure you do your due diligence about the vendor you choose. And I'll just add here on the commercial side that Agiloft is the only CLM supplier to offer a complete satisfaction guarantee on both license and implementation costs. Finally, security. Make sure the system has robust security protocols and auditability. Actually, one more thing, cost. Cost is not the only factor, but it's an important factor for everyone. So I thought I'd throw that in there.
Certainly plays into the business case, which we'll get a chance to talk about. Great question on business case coming up. So before we get to questions though, quick poll, and it will have to be quick. Which aspects of CLM drives the most value? So this is based on your experience as practitioners. So is it procurement? Is it sales operations? Is it legal operations? Is it the cop-out all of the above? Or is it the realization we don't have a system? We don't have a CLM system in place to be able to derive these values. So if you could please, the poll is now open for your votes. In preparation for this, we were deciding where we thought most of this would lay. So let's see how that plays out. I do want to get some questions, so we're going to close the poll in just a couple more seconds, and if we could display the results, that would be great. Right. So we don't have a system was going to be my favorite, reflecting the 64% stat that I shared with you before. All the above. That's a comforting thing to hear, with procurement, legal ops, and sales driving those bits of value. Hiro, Laura, any other observations on this before we move to questions?
So it's interesting that the cop-out, all of the above, was the obviously that all of these areas have value. I think it actually also reflects how mature each of these areas are in contract management. So procurement, probably those folks have the most experience with contract management, I would say. I would have said sales ops was next, and so it's interesting that legal ops is up there, and I think people are starting to. That market is really heating up as people start to understand the value.
Totally, and I think you're right. Procurement have traditionally had more automation in the transaction elements, but certainly as we see more sophistication going into more complex agreements, then some of the traditional transaction-based tools don't work so great. Tell you what we're going to do. Let's thanks for the contribution to the poll, guys. I'd like to get on to some questions, and this question from Matthias is one I alluded to earlier, and this is for you, Laura. How did you build the business case to obtain funds for your investment? What were the drivers and the value sources that you built on?
So, so the business case that was built for this, so like I said, while quality was driving it, and it was, that's something that's very critical to us at the firm. The other big piece, and we looked at it and we said, well, while we don't have a CLM application in place, we think we do this many contracts and we think it takes this long. We had to do we did kind of do some surveys to kind of get some numbers around, like, how long does it take people to draft their statement of work or their main agreement, and then how long is there back and forth with either other groups internally at EY. And so we looked at that, and also try to get some numbers around that, and then took that and said, well, if we automated, we automated the document generation, automated the tracking of the red lines, and automated the approval process, we thought we could save X number of hours. And then that translated into, a dollar value for us. And so that was what, and also because, remember, we did not have a CLM application in place anywhere in the US firm. So it was also something, because quality was driving it, and because there was this we were looking to automate as many of our kind of administrative tasks that our client service professionals have to do. That was another, that was helping us as well, is that the firm was in a position where they really did want to automate as much of these admin type tasks as they possibly could. And then, of course, we really also sold it on, the analytics and the data that we could get out of knowing about our contracting season, our contracting, just what's going into our contracts, what are, our clients, what are they asking for, what's the scope, what does that look like across, a wide group of contracts. We've never been able to do that before. So those were, but really we did look at, how much time could we shave off just administrative work that our client service professionals were having to do just to even generate a contract and get it to a client's signature.
Yeah, that cost to serve component, it may be small for each contract, but when you multiply it by the number of contracts that you're handling, it can become quite a large number. Indeed, my experience, cost to serve, whilst easy to calculate, can actually more than cover the cost of the investment. And then you don't have to start justifying some of the secondary and tertiary benefits. So there's
and I must admit, with our version 1, we increased the time that it took for our people. That was another kind of problem that we had. It added time to the process. Yeah, I'm being really honest here. I mean, that was an issue, is that because it was too complicated. People weren't able, I've been involved in a lot of technology implementations, whether it's a project that I'm involved in, or just, with our firm rolling out new technology, whether it's to clients or whether it's internally. And, one of the things you've got, I always look at it and go, I've got to make sure it's something that I don't make people's jobs more difficult. I don't make it so that it takes longer for them to do their job. This is supposed to help them. And I mean, we're always going to have a few people where new technology is a challenge, just because it's change, any sort of change, technology or otherwise, that can be challenging. But I've really got to make sure that this is something that I make it so that people, none of us had to read a user guide for an iPhone. We figured it out. And I always try and, I think that's a really important thing to consider, is don't overcomplicate this. If try not to.
Totally agree. So Geronimo asks, you went with Agiloft because of the on-prem solution, but that was a few years ago. Would you consider a cloud-based solution now?
Oh, absolutely. But it just, that's just, things have changed at the firm. We have more cloud, or more, cloud-based and or SaaS solutions is open to us for things now. It just wasn't at the time.
Right. Very good. Len asks, how did Ernst & Young overcome the need for a multilingual and multi-regional solution?
Well, it's an interesting question that you bring up. I was fortunate that when I was starting this project, it was just to implement it for our US tax practice. So, and while we are a global firm and we are building out our CLM solution to be the part, to allow for our member firms to use it, I didn't have to deal with that. I only had to, it only had to be in English. So I only had to deal with a single language.
I'll just take that one real quick.
Yeah.
Agiloft has built-in translation. So we have a lot of customers that have international operations, 20 countries, whatever. So it has built-in translations.
Thank you for that. Right, so unfortunately there are so many questions here that we haven't had the opportunity to get to. Some are very technical around capability, which I'm sure our colleagues will be able to answer, and others have strategic importance, so I'll be able to provide some input there too. With an eye to the time though, I do see that we are unfortunately out of time. So it simply remains for me to say thank you to our audience for your participation today. Without your participation, this would not have been a successful webinar. But also to extend my thanks to Laura and to Hiro for a really spectacular presentation today. Very interesting, great depth. And it's always great when we get practitioners to share their experiences, and especially Laura for being so open and honest about the challenges that you faced, and indeed how you overcame them. So with that, thank you for your time, and do have a pleasant day. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Laura.